Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good to have you guys here. If you are new or visiting, my name is Matt. I get the joy of being a priest in this beautiful community. And at Unlimited, we're going to dive into our vision today. Every month or so, we dive into part of our vision. And today, we're going to dive into what it means for us to be a family on a mission. If you are new or visiting, our kind of mission statement is that we are a multi-generational family on a mission to do everything possible to do two things. One, encounter, engage, and converse with our rising generations. Like, we want to be the people who have the first conversations with people on the street. We want to be the people who introduce people to Jesus. Like, we are passionate about being a people on a mission together, whether we are Freddie's age or whether we are someone else's age. I'm not going to point anyone else out in the room. But like oldest to youngest, we are on a mission together, multi-generational family on a mission to do that. And secondly, to be a miracle hub in the middle of the city. I love that we get people contacting us, messaging us, chatting, saying, Matt, I've heard of your God. Someone's prayed for me. We've seen things happen. Can you please explain why? I love that is happening. And so that is who we are. That's what we're doing. And so I want to talk about what it means for us to be a family, a multi-generational family on a mission. Is that right? Cool. Could we have the guys come up to read? Is that right? Jasmine, Lucy coming up to read. Can we welcome these guys, everybody? Very polite in the house today. It's like being at Wimbledon. Jasmine, coming in.
So we're reading page 55 in this book. So it's Mark chapter 9. They left the place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know they were there. This was because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be handed over to men. They will kill him, and 3 days he will rise from the dead." But they didn't understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about it. Jesus and his disciples came to a house in Capernaum. There he asked them, "What are you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet. On the way, they'd argued about which one of them was the most important person. Jesus sat down and called for the 12 disciples to come to him. Then he said, "Anyone who wants to be the first must be the very last. They must be the servant of everyone." Jesus took a little child and had the child stand among them. Then he took the child in his arms. He said to them, "Anyone who welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me also welcomes the one who sent me." "Teacher," said John, "we saw someone driving out demons in your name. We told him to stop because he was not one of us."
"Do not stop him," Jesus said, "for no one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. Anyone who is not against us is for us. What I'm about to tell you is true. Suppose someone gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to the Messiah. That person will certainly not go without a reward. What if someone leads one of these little ones who believe in me to sin? If they do, it would be better if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It would be better for you to enter God's kingdom with only one hand than to go into hell with two hands. In hell, the fire never goes out. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It would be better to enter God's kingdom with only 1 foot than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. If your eye causes you to sin, poke it out. It would be better for you to enter God's kingdom with only 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell. In hell, the worms that eat them do not die. The fire is not put out. Everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but suppose it loses its saltiness. How can you make it salty again? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with each other."
Thank you so much. Can we thank these guys, everybody? I just want you to take one moment, like 30 seconds, and just discuss what's one thing from this verse that's either a bit weird, something you want to know about more, or something that you kind of want to pick up, okay? Is that right? One thing from this verse, and 30 seconds, and I'll come back. What that was a cover for was the fact that I had next week's talk open on my screen, and so that would be no help to you whatsoever. So I think it is really interesting that Jesus has priorities. Jesus is clearly on a mission. And there are places that Jesus goes to and places that he doesn't go to. It's interesting, verse 30, he left that place passing through Galilee. Passing through Galilee, Jesus did not want anyone to know that they were there. Fascinating. Jesus, the one who wants to meet people, love people, care for people, restore lives, passes through unknown, which is a bit of a side note for us, that if Jesus is passing through places and there is a priority list and a definite list, we need to have the same thing. The same should be true for us. I pray that if something comes out of this talk, there will be a question: what am I valuing? What am I prioritizing? In order to serve something, to be part of something, we have to make decisions as to where we're going to place our priorities, our allegiances, our dedication, and where it lies. Saying yes to being part of the family of God, the church, means saying no to other commitments and other things. One of the greatest questions I want to ask today is, when it comes to us being a church family together on a mission, how can we actively try and lose the conversation that they were having on the road? Who amongst us is the greatest? I love this story. Who amongst us is the greatest? In a world that, in its most ugly form, jostles for position, desperate to retrain and retract power, desperate for kind of like me being top dog, it reeks of despair, insecurity, trying to climb to the top at all costs. And therefore, how do we take our roles seriously as someone who is called to serve one another? To play the role that Jesus played at the Last Supper, to serve our friends, to wash feet, both literally and metaphorically. How do we enable ourselves to choose to place ourselves as the role of the servant amongst ourselves? One of the things I was most impressed by when I joined Unlimited was there was this culture where when the service finished and the blessing had been, pronounced, people would run to the back, grab mugs, and run out to wash them up. There was like this sort of like fight over who was going to do the washing up, because they wanted to serve each other. I've never seen a culture like that really work before, but it was this really beautiful thing, a beautiful moment. One of the things I love most about Anglican ordinations, I got invited to one this week, was that when you are ordained as a priest in the Church of England, the year before you are ordained as a deacon, a servant. A servant in church, no matter how high up the tree you go, whether you're a lowly priest like myself or whether you become a bishop or an archbishop, you are always ordained servant first. And I'm so grateful that in this space, there are no egomaniacs. There are no people wanting power. Yet like the woman who comes before Jesus, pours her heart out, who becomes the first evangelist. The woman who at dinner comes and washes Jesus' feet with her tears and dries them with her hair. We too come to church not with a self-important motive, but with humility and an attitude of wanting to put each other before the self, wanting other people to know God, to love God, to become like Jesus, to become part of this beautiful family, be made in the image of his Son. And so our goal and our game, I think the point of Unlimited, the point of church, is to help each other to become the beautiful bride of Christ. The bride that we were called to be. And I think that this only happens when we are honest and when we call out conversations like Jesus did when the disciples were walking on the road. Here is where we see Jesus' heart. Verses 33 to 37. Jesus and his disciples came to a house in Capernaum. There he asked, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet. On the way, they had argued about which one of them was the most important. Jesus sat down. He called his 12 disciples, and they came near. Then he said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be last, and they must be the servant of everyone." Jesus took a little child he had standing among them, and he took this child in his arms and said, "Anyone who welcomes these little children in my name welcomes me." This is a side note. This is both a metaphorical thing about people who are new to faith and who are young in faith. Anyone who welcomes me also welcomes the one who sent me. These are two separate events. Two separate events, two separate conversations. They are arguing about who is the greatest on the way. And then they are sat down. In verse 35, Jesus calls his disciples. Jesus has been watching and waiting. Jesus has been waiting for a space and a time. He rebukes them not in public. He doesn't talk about this on the road where there is the public that can witness it. Yet he talks to them in private, where he can care for his disciples. Remember the story last week where they'd gone out and they tried to heal the boy and they couldn't heal the boy. They'd been praying and their prayers hadn't been answered and they'd been humiliated by a growing crowd. Well, Jesus chooses not to humiliate them in public, but rather come privately and have this conversation. Jesus is kind. Jesus is full of grace and truth. The order matters. So he sits with his disciples and he has this conversation that he wants to have. Anyone who wants to be first must be last. I don't know about you, but I find this challenging in a world that says push for the top, keep going, be ambitious. How do we wrestle with these questions? How do we wrestle with the question, how do we really serve each other? How do we come about this with humility? How do we love people, care for people, and still drive away forward, seeing the church become more beautiful, more holy, more gorgeous? And so I want to break out of this moment. At Unlimited, we have a conversation in the middle of the talk, partly so you can disagree with me, and partly so you can have a conversation, and hopefully it will, I think that dialogue matters more than monologue. And so I want to ask these two questions today. Where do you find it hardest to serve rather than seek recognition or importance? And secondly, is there an area of your life or the church where you sense God might be calling you to serve, but you've been holding back? And if so, why? And perhaps if you're new to faith today, maybe you're new to the church today, I wonder what the question would look like if you asked the question honestly, what would it look like for me to serve rather than to receive? How do people find that? Good? Tricky? Easy? Tricky, really tricky. I guess the final question, I wanted three questions really, but didn't have space for three questions. And I guess the final one was are there any lies that you think you're being told by the enemy that stop you from serving? But then I kind of thought I don't have space for that. So one to ponder when you get home. Are there any lies that the enemy is telling you that you can then pull back on? Let's jump to verse 35. Verse 35, Jesus sat down. He called for his 12 disciples and they came to him. And then he said, anyone who wants to be first must be very last. Anyone who wants to, they must be the servant of everyone. Jesus sat down. This is a sign of his authority, a sign that he is the teacher and they are the students. And then he says, must be. I find this word must be quite challenging. I don't know about you. Not like when we feel like it, not when we're on a good day, not when we're on a roll, not when things are going well, not when we can be bothered. Must be. Must be the very last. One of my favourite people in the world is a doctor who's in Bournemouth, and he was one of the most senior doctors in the hospital in Bournemouth. He was a cardiologist, and he'd be highly embarrassed that I'm talking about him now, and so I didn't tell him. And so he became a priest when we were in Bournemouth, and we managed to kind of encourage him to become a priest. But I remember this one time where we had quite a lot of addicts in our church family, and a few hundred addicts in our church family actually. And one of them had just gone back to the little ears in the room, gone back to the thing that they were struggling with, and they were sick everywhere. I mean, sick everywhere. And this person turned up and they were unconscious, and it was a sight. Right? You could smell it from a mile away. And I will never remember that. I will never forget the day where Johannes was scooping up sick with his hand. They're one of the most senior doctors in the hospital. And then one of the ambulance crew came. We called the ambulance. I called them. I was like, hey, it's Rev Matt. Can you send an ambulance? And nothing happened. Johannes called them and they came within about 20 seconds. And they showed up. And I will never forget the ambulance crew member said to me, Matt, I don't know who Dr. Johannes is, but I know who he is. Please, can you introduce me to him because I don't want to be embarrassed because I should know who this doctor is in the hospital. And I was like, hey, this is Dr. Johannes. And this ambulance crew member looked at me and looked down at Johannes, who was like scooping up sick in his hands, and looked at me and he said, is he always like this? And I was like, yeah. And he said, he took me to one side, he was like, do you know who this guy is? And I'm like, yeah, he's Johannes. And this was his character. This is who he was. He wasn't putting it on for a Sunday. Like countless times you'd walk along the street in one of the rougher parts of Bournemouth called Boscombe, and he would be there caring for people, loving people, not because he was on duty, but because he loved people. He was humble. He was humble. He wanted to serve. That's why we encourage him to become a priest. R. Alan Cole says this: if we desire spiritual greatness, then what we really truly desire is the task of service to others. So we must deliberately choose the lowliest, most humble places. This is the whole key to life, the life of Jesus. I find this really challenging. So I want to put it out there. I find this really challenging. Before you guys turned up, I made a point of this. I was like, Matt, I'm going to put my theology into practice, and I cleaned the loo. I was like, I've got to put this into practice. I've got to be in this space. The reminder that this is the life that Jesus is wanting us to live, and he is not unwilling to live it for himself. Jesus' whole mission on earth is that he would come and serve, to give to us in a way that we could never give back to him, to give himself as a perfect atoning sacrifice for sin on the cross, something that we could never repay. Mark 9:34, but they kept quiet. Wouldn't you? Like, be honest with me. Like, if Jesus was like, hey, what were you guys chatting about? You'd be like, he said, you'd be quiet. They kept quiet on the way about what they'd argued about with one another, about who was the most important. Joel Marcus said that this story is recounted to illustrate to the disciples' misunderstanding of the strange logic of the dominion of God. This is told that we can understand something about the heart of Jesus. What is interesting here is that they've witnessed Jesus' transfiguration. One of the great Christian theologians from the early kind of church, a guy called Origen, he said, what they've witnessed is this transfiguration. Jesus goes up the mountain. He's transfigured as he has a conversation with God about what will be. He temporarily takes on this kind of like heavenly form, a heavenly glow. He is transfigured into the glory that we will see when we enter heaven. And he goes up the mountain and he takes some of his disciples, and Origen kind of ingeniously links it that we've seen what Jesus is going to do. Like, we want that for ourselves. We've seen what Jesus is going to become in heaven. Like, maybe we can have that too. We've seen the greatness and the glory of God. Could we have some of that for ourselves? Genius, him linking the two. This is dangerous. Dangerous thinking on many levels. The most dangerous reason is because this is how the rebellion in heaven started. Remember what the devil says, the enemy of God. How can I be glorified? The devil, who is the chief worship leader of heaven, wants it for himself, wanting what was not his, wanting what only Jesus can have, thinking that they deserve better. It's interesting, isn't it? It's a test for all of us. Humility is not a natural way of thinking. Maybe it comes really naturally to you. For me, it's a battle. We live in a corrupt world where we're taught from Freddie's age, from the stage that we can start to walk and talk and think and behave. We're taught to be naturally selfish. No one desires it. No one wants it for their kids, but it's the way it is. Yet this is not the way of Christ, is it? The way of Christ is to put his own desires to one side, to serve each other. I said a few weeks ago that humility is not thinking less of ourselves, but about ourselves less often. Not thinking you're rubbish, not thinking that you won't make a difference. It's not thinking less about yourself and your self-worth, but thinking about yourself less frequently, less often. Rather than saying, I don't want to serve on the kids' team. I couldn't possibly serve on the kids' team. They're noisy and you got my kids in there. I would want to serve on the kids' team. to changing it to saying, but these kids are precious in Jesus' eyes. These kids are valuable. Yes, there's a lengthy safeguarding process. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, maybe it's more appealing to sit and have a cup of coffee and a donut while the talk is happening. But to say, these guys are at an age where they need to learn about the beauty of God. Of course I will serve. Or you'd say, I don't want to put myself on the hospitality team. I've got to get here early and I've got to serve coffee and, I've got to speak to some people and it may be difficult, or I've got to do some paperwork. But rather than saying, no, but I can serve people. I can allow people to enter into the presence of God, knowing that they are loved and cherished and welcome into this space in a world that says you won't be. And we can break the perception and love people and love people and love people. I had a friend who was an accountant. I still have a friend who's an accountant. And this week, I spent 3.5 hours on Zoom with him from 7:30 till about 10:30 at night, where he made our accounts work. He went through them and he made the end of year reporting make sense. Where he took them and he put them into a format that we can submit to the Charity Commission. This is a friend who's a chartered accountant by day, and by night he sat on Zoom with me making the reporting process simpler. Not because he likes pulling apart our finances, not because he wants to sit with me for 3 hours on Zoom, but because he loves the church, because he loves Jesus, because he wants to make the job of a priest slightly easier. This is who he is. This is the upside down kingdom that we are called to. The question reflects the nature of the world that we are living in. Who is the greatest? Which continually forgets that life on earth is incredibly short compared to the course of eternity. And that question, who is the greatest, is a distinctly human trait. So, let's move on to, I've got just a little bit in the juicy part where Jesus says, avoid sin at all costs. There's this moment I want to pick up. It's a short bit where he says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It'll be better for you to enter into God's kingdom with only one hand than going to hell with two hands. In hell, the fire never goes out. If your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It'll be better for you to enter God's kingdom with only 1 foot than have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. If your eye causes you to sin, poke it out. It'll be better for you to enter God's kingdom with only 1 eye than have 2 eyes. Is this a literal statement? No. No, it is not. Please do not come back to church next week with 1 arm and 1 leg. That will serve nobody. But is it, are we meant to take it seriously? Yes. Yes, we are. We are called to take this sentiment as seriously as we can. There are a few theological points that I want to pick up that I think are said in the church that are clearly not in the minds of the writers of the Gospels, are not in the mind of Mark. Today's world, the church will say, well, everyone gets to go to heaven. Everyone gets to go to heaven, like live a good life, bad life, doesn't really matter. That's called universalism. That is a heresy. This is not in the thought of Mark as he is writing this. Mark is wanting us to keep a sharp account. Mark is wanting us to go back and say, what areas of my life do I need to sort out? What areas of my life do I need to pull into account? What areas of our life do we need to come before Jesus and say, that was wrong, I repent? Second thing is a chance after death for a limited period of punishment. I just can't read that in this text. There are some churches that will say, well, God is just, God is nice, God will only kind of punish people for a limited period and it will be over. I just can't see that in the text. And then I think the other thing is that Mark makes it so abundantly clear that we have a choice in life. Every person has the choice for heaven. None of us deserve it. None of us can earn it. None of us, are automatically going to heaven. But we have a choice to choose Jesus. We have a choice to choose heaven. There is a ticket for heaven with every single person's name on it. Yet God gives us that choice. Blows our mind. God, I don't think, designed or destines people for hell. I just want to say this. I don't think God makes people to be an object of his wrath and for hell. I don't think God chooses that for anybody. I think hell was originally created for the devil and his demons. And he gives us an opportunity to repent. R. Alan Cole states this: such punishment is self-inflicted by a refusal to respond to God's grace. I love the way he words that. It's self-inflicted by a refusal to respond to God's grace. You link this beautifully with that very last line about saltiness. Salt is good, but suppose it loses its saltiness. How can you make it salty again? Have salt amongst yourselves. I love that phrase. Have salt. Do you remember like when salty was like, oh, they're a bit salty, it would be like a bit of an insult. Do you remember that? Or is that just me? No, it's just me. I'm old. Okay, fine. Okay. Have salt amongst yourselves and be at peace with one another. R. Alan Cole goes on to say, Christians are called to be the moral preservative in the world. I love that. Christians are called to be the moral preservative in the world. How do you tomorrow morning, as you enter the spheres of influence that you enter, choose to be a moral preservative in your office, on your team calls, in the policies that you're writing, on campus? How does it work for you in your team with the people you manage to be a moral preservative, to stand up for what is right, what is just, what is beautiful, what is whole, what is gorgeous? How do you do this? If we are called to be people of purity, to speak against corruption, we are called to proclaim Jesus to a group of people that are perishing. How do we proclaim Jesus? How do we speak up for what is true and right and pure? This is why I go on TikTok. This is why I'm on TikTok most days. I get the joy of having these conversations with people live on TikTok. And people say, Matt, do you really believe this? And do you really believe that? And how can that and this be true? And we get the joy of unpacking the truth that we are called to turn to him, to love him with all our heart, to be a people who will see who Jesus is, to do our best to become like his son, Jesus, and to be a people that will love each other. And so my conclusion is simple. Who we really are is what's being called into question in this passage. Will we lose our saltiness? Will we lose the saltiness of Christ to preserve all that is good about Jesus within us? Will we allow ourselves to be salty in the world? And how do we do absolutely everything not to conform to the patterns of this world for good or for bad, but rather fully commit ourselves to the upside down kingdom of loving God and serving each other? Would you stand if you're able? We are going to pray together.